Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Weekly Reads. This reading week has been quite the weird one. So I started the reading week on Saturday reading Priest of Bones by Peter McLean. This is book one in the War for the Rose Throne series. And I would describe this novel as being an urban crime fantasy. Now, when you an urban crime fantasy inspired by the television series Peaky Blinders, which, if you don't know, is a relatively recent television series starring Cillian Murphy, in which Cillian plays a gangster called Thomas Shelby, who, alongside his brothers, lead this gang in 1920s Manchester, and he and a few of his brothers are World War I veterans. And Peaky Blinders very heavily inspired this series. When I say I would describe Priest of Bones as an urban crime fantasy, or normally when you hear the word urban fantasy, you think of a fantasy set on Earth. But in this case, the urban setting is in a secondary or constructed or made up world. Anyway, getting back to a quick plot synopsis of Priest of Bones. Priest of Bones is about Thomas Piety, who led a gang called the Pious Men in the city of Ellenburg, alongside his brother and a few friends and cohorts. Many of them were conscripted into a war, and with the war won, many of them, those who survived, have been released from their duty. And the novel opens with Thomas leading his regiment. He has in the army become a priest of a war goddess and assumed an unofficial command of his regiment with the loss of their captain. So he's leading his men and women back to his home city of Ellenburg, where most of the regiment ends up disbanding, but a core group around him accompany him to Ellenburg with the promise of riches. Essentially, this core, along with Thomas's brothers group, become the nucleus for the new Pious Men. When they reach Ellenburg, Thomas realizes that his properties, his businesses, his position has been stolen from him. And so the rest of the book is Thomas taking back what is his and reasserting his position and his dominance in his neighborhood and eventually most of the city. As Thomas is pretty much reasserting himself, he is recruited by the kingdom's secret service, the Queen's Men, to act as an agent in order to flush out the Scanian enemy nations, people who have infiltrated the city during the war and have taken over most of the criminal enterprises. As basically their goal is to use Ellenburg as a beachhead for a future invasion. I love this book. And I pretty much finished it in one day, which is something I very rarely do. I love the plotting. The plot is just really, really interesting and well done. The pacing is amazing. The chapters are short, sharp, and just a continual sort of drive to the conclusion. I also love the character of Thomas Piety. The novel is first person, told from Thomas's point of view, and McLean captures Thomas's voice wonderfully. I also love the hints of other things going on, but that Thomas, given who he is, isn't either knowledgeable or all that interested in what's going on. So it kind of it's a bit of an interesting frustration for me as somebody who really likes the more political situation, the more magical situation. Although sometimes one doesn't really need to understand the magic for the magic to work. As much as I love the novel, I do have a few issues. Two, definitely. One is that as much as I love Thomas Paide's characterization, I do think there's one element in which Peter McLean does sort of falter in the characterization. That's there is an attraction, but the problem is that attraction, you don't quite buy it. I don't think we're told Thomas has this attraction, but we don't. It's not really felt. It's more, I would say, almost a tacked on sort of thing. And I suspect that perhaps this attraction is one of the influences from Peaky Blinders. Because there's a very similar, although in this case it's more, in Peaky Blinders it's a bit more of a love triangle, although not quite a love triangle. Whereas in this case, it's more of an unrequited sort of attraction. And there it's two characters are mutually attracted to each other, and then the third is just basically a villain. But anyway, so that was one of my issues. And another issue I have is that Thomas being an agent for the Crown for a good chunk of this book, or for all of this book, sorry for the spoiler warnings, does take a bit of his agency away. Although, in truth, I think the fact that he is an agent does sort of play into future books, in that Thomas does migrate more into being a spy, an agent, more so than a crime lord. But anyway, but I did really love this book, and I highly recommend it, and I'm looking forward to getting to the next two books that I have. The second book in the series, Priest of Lies, will be a reread, and I just got Priest of Gallows in last month, and there will be a fourth book coming out next year, which I'm definitely looking forward to. Unless, of course, the third book falls apart completely, but anyway. So, after I read Priest of Bones on Saturday, I had initially, thought about reading There by Tommy Orange, a sort of a rehash of what happened a few weeks ago with City of Lost Fortunes and Great Believers. But then I'm like, well, no, maybe I should try to keep the fantasy ball rolling, since, Priest of Bones was such a wonderful reading experience that maybe I should, try for a fantasy. And so I started on The Bowmaker by Sarah Beth Durst. And I don't know what happened, but Saturday was just a really weird reading day. It was just, I think, reading for 11 plus hours on Saturday, and just, I don't know, but I was not really in the mood to read, I don't think, on Sunday. Plus, there were a few other issues that happened on Sunday that I don't particularly want to talk about. But I started The Bowmaker Sunday morning. And it's the story of a group of heroes who, 25 years in the book's past, defeated a Dark Lord. And now 25 years later, the group gets back together to help one of their, two of them work something that would put them in the category of the Dark Lord they defeated. And I got a bit of the way through the book, and I just wasn't feeling it. So I decided to go ahead and set it aside, and I will come back to this maybe sometime later this year or the beginning of next year, which is a bit frustrating because I was quite looking forward to reading this, but I will come back to it, and hopefully my second go at this book will be much better than my first one. So I took a break for a few hours and felt maybe what I needed was some manga. So I ended up reading 2 volumes of Fairy Tail. Fairy Tail volumes 2 and 3 by Hiro Mashima. So Fairy Tail volume 2, the first part of volume 2 deals with the Duke Everlue arc. I'm thinking it's called like the Invade Duke Everlue's Mansion or something. Basically, Natsu and Happy have convinced Lucy to aid them in stealing a book from the repugnant Duke Everlue. They are successful, and while the events of the arc ends up with them not getting paid, Lucy does end up coming away with a new key, which plays a role in the arc that kind of takes up the second half of volume 2 and all of volume 3, and that is the Lullaby arc, in which Erza, the strongest woman in Fairy Tail, recruits Natsu and his rival Gray Filibuster to aid her in taking down the Eisenwald Guild. They are a dark guild who are planning a terrorist attack. Lucy comes along at the request of Mary Jane, and basically this grouping will eventually form the nucleus of what is popularly called Team Natsu. And this will be the core team that will be the team that's focused on throughout the rest of the series, with Natsu and Lucy as the core. But from this point forward, basically all of them sort of come together for the rest of the series, and then other characters will join as needed. But anyway, so I mean, I'm not all that fond of the Duke Everlue arc, but I am quite fond of the Lullaby arc. I thought that one is really incredibly strong, and some of the artwork is quite well done. Let me see if I can show one. No. I kind of like that and stuff. So yeah, so I really enjoyed them, these 2 volumes, and it did make my Sunday a lot better after I'd read them and while I was reading them. So that was definitely a positive. So on Monday, I didn't read anything because the 4 Children of the Apocalypse were going to come at some point, and I was also getting frustrated with setting up a printer, so Monday was just a washout on reading. And then on Tuesday, I decided to read some more manga. My plan for the last days of August and beginning of September was to read mostly manga, even though I really don't have enough manga to really warrant it for that long a time. So I only read manga for Sunday and Tuesday. So on Tuesday I read Magi volumes 3 and 4 by Shinobu Ohtaka. I am really starting to love this manga. Volume 3 is mostly focused on Aladdin. After Aladdin and Alibaba conquered the Amun dungeon, Aladdin has disappeared. In this volume, we find out what happened to him. He ended up among the Kuga people, a tribal people who are horsemen and women, and who used to rule a vast empire. During this arc, Aladdin learns more about what he is, like who he is, that he's a Magi, that about what his role is, and he also has his first encounter with the Ku Empire, who are spreading out. And Aladdin, along with several other characters, kind of peacefully resolve the brewing conflict between the Kuga and the Ku, and sees the Kuga basically peacefully sort of join the Empire, and that. And it's really quite affecting. I really enjoyed that little arc. And then in volume 4, I think we start with at the end of volume 3, the attention shifts from Aladdin to Morgiana, who has since joined a caravan seeking passage to go to her homeland. And while she does that, she encounters a group of slavers who have managed to capture Aladdin. She helps rescue him, and together they defeat these slavers and bandits, and then they go to Balbad, where they encounter King Sinbad and his retainers, and find out that Balbad is in the midst of a civil war, of which one side is led by Aladdin's old friend Alibaba. And that's really the beginning of what I'm thinking is going to be the first major arc of Magi. And I really enjoyed this volume too. I just had a complete blast with both volumes, and I'm quite looking forward to reading more. I've got 3 more volumes of Magi to do, and I'm hoping I can pick up some more at some point in the not too distant future. So on Wednesday, I decided to read one of the anthologies that I've had my eye on for a bit, and that was A New Sons, original speculative fiction by people of color, edited by Nisi Shawl. So I read this over like Wednesday, Thursday, and today, and for the most part, I thought most of the stories were okay to bad. There were only 3 stories that really jumped out at me, that I really, really liked. And those were The Virtue of Unfaithful Translations by Minsu Kang, which is a sort of a fictional history that was brilliantly well done, in which a historian writes a sort of a revisionist take on a historical event, in which 2 translators basically intentionally mistranslate the vitriolic dialogue from an emperor and a up-and-coming rival that sees a peaceful resolution to the conflict. I thought this story was wonderful, brilliant. My one concern is there's like a postscript at the end that, like, I'm not entirely sure what its aim is. That kind of, like, I don't know. But I mean, for the most part, I really enjoyed that story. I also really liked Burn the Ships by Alberto Yanez. Although, again, I think there was a bit of the images, the narrative. There's a point where one character has a sense of this one god figure. The novel or the short story is basically about a fantasy version of the Spanish conquest of the Aztecs and North and South America. And the story's about one woman who's a witch who joined with a number of other witches to enact a magical spell to, if not drive away the invaders, to certainly bloody their nose and to get them to not be quite as brutal as they have been. Her husband has a certain relationship with the gods, and with this one god in particular. And then at the end of the story, she has a similar encounter, and it's the difference between his encounters and his interpretation and what the god reveals to her is, like, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure it quite works. But I think for the most part, the short story itself is brilliantly done, and I think just that one part, I don't know. And then the best story in this collection, or anthology, by far, I think, is Blood and Bells by Karen Loachi. It is a weird, perhaps post-apocalyptic, perhaps constructed world in which a city has been parts of a city has been sort of turned over to gangs or Native American inspired travel groups, and it's about a sort of Romeo and Juliet story that kind of very interesting, and I really enjoyed it. So anyway, so what will I be reading this coming reading week? So I will start on Saturday and Sunday starting Space Opera September. So the first book on my Space Opera September TBR is Radiance by Catherynne and Valente. I have read this book a few times and I've loved it. It is a space opera that that posits a solar system that is completely habitable. And it's about Hollywood, about a father coming to terms with the death of his daughter in the only way he knows how, which is by writing a film about it. This is a brilliant book, and I'm looking forward to reading it again. So after I finish Radiance, I have a few options, and I'm not entirely sure which way I want to go. I could continue on with Space Opera September and read A Memory Called Empire again by Arkady Martine. This is a beginning of at least a space opera duology in which an ambassador named Mahit Zamer is posted to a galactic or an interstellar empire with the task of finding out what happened to her predecessor and becoming embroiled in imperial politics at the highest levels. I've read this a few times before. I quite like a number of scenes in the book, and other parts not so fond of, but I'm kind of looking forward to having another go at A Memory Called Empire. I could also kind of pivot from science fiction and read literary fiction, in which case I will go with They're There by Tommy Orange, which I've been meaning to get to for a few months now. Or I could go with history. Steve Donahue mentioned as part of Tudor Timber. There are a lot of reading things happening in September, aren't there? That one of the things about Tudor Timber is reading works about or set in the Tudor period, but not necessarily written in the Tudor period, I think. So I would probably go with Winter King, Henry VII and the Dawn of Tudor England by Thomas Penn, which I've been meaning to get to for quite a while. I think that would be my only entry into Tudor Timber. And as far as Shake Tube or Shake Timber or whatever it's called, I really don't want to read Shakespeare this year, so I will bow out on that. Well, dang. And here I was planning on doing a bit of a rant on what all's been going on in Texas the past few weeks, and I'm already at 26 minutes. So, anyway, needless to say, the abortion ban is just sickening. Absolutely sickening. And then, of course, the voter suppression law, again, just incredibly frustrating and sickening. And to top everything off, in my home county, the number of COVID cases spiked by 500 in one day or in a few days. I want to say the COVID cases are back to what they were at the height of the pandemic last year. And the hospitals are overcrowded again. It is just, yeah. So I'm hunkering down, I'm sheltering in place, wearing a mask everywhere, and I probably won't be getting out anytime soon. It is just, things aren't going very well in my neck of the woods. So anyway, BookTube, hopefully I will, so looking forward to BookTube next week. I'm planning on doing the backlist book tag tomorrow, or not tomorrow, Monday, and then the P tag on Tuesday, and then maybe a few tags on Wednesday and Thursday, depending what I catch. And of course, next Friday will be weekly reads. So until next week, BookTube, thank you, have a great evening and weekend, and please, please stay safe.